The grand jurors felt a responsibility to expose the abuse and make recommendations to ensure that something like this never happens again. In their words, we are going to shine a light on their conduct because that is what the victims deserve. And we're going to make our recommendations for how the laws should change so that no one will have to conduct another inquiry like this one. We exercise our historical and statutory right as grand jurors to inform the public of our findings. The report continues. We can't charge most of the culprits. What we can do is tell our fellow citizens what happened and try to get something done about it. Here are the 4 reforms that the grand jury recommends to prevent this type of abuse from happening again and care for victims. First, eliminate the criminal statute of limitations for sexually abusing children. Child sexual predators should no longer be able to hide behind a criminal statute of limitations. Thanks to a recent amendment, the current law permits victims to come forward until age 50. That's better than it was before, but still not good enough, according to the grand jury. Given the physical and emotional trauma that sexual abuse victims undergo, it is well documented that the process of telling someone about their abuse can take years or even decades. Justice for these victims should not be denied. Pennsylvania lawmakers should send a clear message and empower law enforcement agencies to hunt down all future child predators, no matter how long they live. Second, the grand jury urges lawmakers to create a civil window in Pennsylvania so that older victims may now sue for damages from when their bodies were defiled as children. The law in place now gives child sex abuse victims 12 years to sue once they turn 18. But victims in their 30s or older fall under a different law. They get only 2 years. For victims in this age range, the window for them to sue expired back in the 1990s, long before revelations about the institutional nature of sexual abuse within the church. This is unacceptable. The grand jury proposal would open up a limited window, offering abuse survivors a chance, finally, to be heard in court. All we're asking is to give victims those 2 years back, the grand jurors wrote. I've spent time with dozens of victims, those here today and those across Pennsylvania. Not one has ever expressed a desire for compensation when they came forward and shared their truth. But they shouldn't have to go without means to pay for the counseling and substance abuse treatment and other assistance they need to fight the demons inflicted upon them by the church. Several other states have legally created windows for victims to sue. This report demonstrates the need for this reform in Pennsylvania. This has actually been debated in the halls of the General Assembly in the past, but so far, the interests of the church and the insurance lobby have triumphed over the needs of victims. Given the findings of this grand jury, such a position should no longer be tenable. Heed the words of the grand jurors. Trust the victims. Adopt this reform. Third, the grand jury recommends that the penalties for a continuing failure to report child abuse be clarified. We can't pass laws telling the church how to administer internal operations, but we can demand that it inform authorities about rapists and molesters, wrote the grand jury. They recommended fixing the law, which currently creates a legal gray area around an abuser being, quote, active or not, and if their repeated instances of abuse are targeted at the same child or many children. The new language should impose a continuing obligation to report, quote, while the person knows or has reasonable cause to believe that the abuser is likely to commit additional acts of child abuse. Fourth and finally, they believe that civil confidentiality agreements should not cover communications with law enforcement. Confidentiality agreements between victims and the church were usually written to make the victim afraid of talking to anyone at all. Victims assume they can't even talk to the police. This is not true. and church officials use this as a tool to silence victims and protect the institution. The grand jury is recommending that this be made crystal clear, proposing a new statute that no past or present non-disclosure agreement prevents a victim from talking to law enforcement. Additionally, they recommend the statute should require that future agreements must plainly state that contact with police about criminal activity is permitted. The dioceses have issued many public statements in recent times. They claim to have changed their ways. They claim to have put appropriate safeguards in place and no longer have tolerance for sexual abuse of any kind. Statements are one thing. The proof of their claims will be if they support each of the 4 grand jury recommendations. So, on behalf of the grand jurors, I issue the following clear challenge to every Pennsylvania bishop and the archbishop in each diocese. Adopt and support each and every one of these recommendations and to Pennsylvania law right now. Adopt and support each of these recommended reforms to Pennsylvania law right now. Stand up today, right now, and announce your support for these common sense reforms. That is the real test that will determine whether or not things have really changed, or if it'll just be business as usual after the dust settles.